Welcome in, Jake West, Director, Team FYN Sports, joined by Caleb Tallman. This is the Western North Carolina Shootaround presented by Team FYN Sports. We're going to get into some of last week's games in the Smoky Mountain Conference, along with some other games in Western North Carolina, and then we will preview this upcoming week's games. Remember, we'll talk about games from Wednesday to Wednesday. So from last Wednesday to today, and then from today till next Wednesday, we'll highlight and recap some of those games. Unfortunately, we are getting some cancellations that are starting to happen. Murphy and Cherokee just had to cancel their game that was supposed to be getting played tonight, right now. So that's unfortunate, and hopefully the COVID bug will stay away, and we'll get to have a full basketball season. Hopefully this game can get rescheduled. But Caleb, start us off and tell us about some of the games from last week.
Yeah, I mean, we got lots of highlights, lots of stuff to share with y'all this week. Exciting week of basketball. It's like we're finally in full swings. Robbinsville's got some games that they're playing. Just lots of good action going around the conference. I say we just start off real quick. Jake, we'll take a look. Not a lot of conference games have been played yet, but let's take just a quick look at the conference standings. When we look at those conference standings in girls basketball, a lot of teams, with one conference win, but, some highlights. Cherokee's 4-1. Murphy's girls are 4-2. And this is their overall record, not conference record, of course. Robbinsville's girls have started off 3-0. Hazel's girls are 3-2, just to cover some of the highlights there. But as we get into the week, let's talk about the boys conference side of things. Don't want to miss out there. Hayesville, obviously undefeated so far to start the season, Jake, and picked up their first conference win over Andrews last night. And we got some highlights from that game that we'll get to later. But when you look at some of the other records from around the conference, Swain 5-1, Andrews 3-3, Cherokee 3-3, Robbinsville's 1-2, Murphy's 1-2. But as a whole, every team in the conference hasn't played more than one conference game up to this point. So no one distancing themselves, but we do have some big conference matchups that we'll talk about later in the show coming up. But we'll start off talking about Hayesville basketball and taking a look at their last week. We'll start off with the girls. The girls lost to Highlands last Friday. I was there, Jake. It is just, sometimes, and I think we'll see other teams having this. Highlands, has a really good girls team. I'll just go ahead and say that. Got a good head coach and Coach Lamb. And I don't know if you've ever been up there, Jake, but going all the way up to Highlands, higher elevation, smaller gym, it's just always an odd place to play. And I think you're going to see a lot of teams go up there and not play their best basketball this year, especially on the girls' side, because their girls' team's pretty solid. Their boys' team's not as good this year. And we saw that as Hayesville beat the boys' team 59-26. Interesting note there, Jake McTaggart was on his official visit to Charlotte, so he didn't actually play in that game. So they were without McTaggart and without Lunsford. Played some 5-guard lineups on Friday night and still ran over Highlands a little bit. And then on Monday, a big surprise, Jake, was Hayesville's girls beat Hiawassee Dam on Monday night. Coming into that game after watching them play at Highlands on Friday, I really did not see Hayesville's girls, even as a Hayesville fan, winning that game. We've got some highlights from that one that I'll pop up. But Hayesville's girls got off to a slow start, as you can see by the scoreboard there in the corner, and then really got hot late and really improved. Big three-point shooting. They had a really good three-point shooting night as a team. Not just Lila Payne, but Cecilia Jones and Lila Roberts had some threes as well.
Yeah, I was there for that game. Lila Payne couldn't hit the broadside of a barn in the first half, and then in the second half, she just flipped a switch and turned it on and couldn't miss. I think that was a big reason how Hiawassee Dam had a lead to end the first half, because Lila Payne just wasn't able to get things going from the three-point line. But I think she may have hit 4 threes in the second half, and that really helped Hayesville pull away.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. One of the things I really liked about what the Hazel girls did is, and you'll see it in this highlight, coming down the stretch of the fourth quarter when they just had a 4 or 5 point lead. They didn't try to run clock, did they, Jake? They kind of put their foot on the gas, and instead of trying to bleed clock, they increased their lead to the point where it was out of reach.
Yeah. One thing also back to the first half, how Hawaii Dam got their lead. I mean, Hawaii Dam couldn't miss in the first half. They got hot early and couldn't miss. That's a fun game to watch, at least the first 3 quarters. If you want to go back on fyntv.com and watch it, I would encourage you to, especially if you like girls basketball. Kind of got out of hand in the second half, but first half was really fun to watch.
Yeah, and then Hazel's boys, you can talk about it a little bit, Jake, because I know you were there on Monday night. And I mean, they ran over Hawaii Dam 81-41. It's Hazel's boys the last 2 or 3 games. They had to play really good early in the year to beat Tallulah Falls, but they've been kind of coasting ever since. I think they're ahead above most of the teams that are they've played in the last week.
Yeah, the first quarter of that Hayesville Hawaii Dam game was tied. I think it may have been a 2 or 3 point ball game at the end of the first quarter. Hawaii Dam was playing good, so it's good to see them get challenged early on. You mentioned the Tallulah Falls game and how they were challenged and heading into overtime. So coming out of the kind of lull in their schedule that they've had, you hope that, and we'll get into their next week's schedule and everything. You hope that they'll still be on top on their A game because, like you mentioned, I mean, they've been cruising here lately.
Yeah, exactly. And then just wrapping up Hayesville's week, and we'll mention Andrews too because that's the team they played last night. I was there on the call last night with Darren McClure, and I've got highlights from both those games. We'll start off in the girls' game. I got the wrong one in there. We'll go to the boys' game first. Hazel's boys' game, they won 59-35. And really just controlled the game. Andrews made a late first quarter push and a third quarter push, but it just wasn't enough to hang with the Yellow Jackets men's team. Really, Hazel's size and speed really, really bothered the Wildcats boys team. And Colby Ash, honestly, Jake, had a little bit of an off night, but it didn't really matter as the Yellow Jackets had it going really top to bottom. Asher Brown had a really good night, and that's a kid that I think sometimes people forget, Jake. I said this on the broadcast last night. Asher Brown's only a sophomore. You feel like he's been around forever because he's been on varsity in football and basketball since his freshman year. But he's just a sophomore, and you're really starting to see him come into his own in basketball. I think he had 4 threes last night. Also hit a fast break bucket and one. There's a 3 you saw him. I mean, he's just a really, really good athlete. And if he's one that starts to come around and can end up being a 3rd or 4th scoring option, that just makes Hazel that much more dangerous.
Yeah, I watched him play against Hawaii Dam and liked what I saw from him. But also what I liked was number 20. I think he's number 20, Taylor McClure. He's a really fun kid to watch. I think he's just a sophomore too, right?
Yeah.
He's fun kid to watch. He'll jump up there with anybody and try to snag down a rebound. I mean, he really fights down low. But as far as you watching this game last night, what did you see from Andrews?
Andrews really good. I think they're missing the Bateman kid. I think he's hurt right now. I don't know if they'll get him back or not. One of the really things that hurt them was Cam Rattler got 2 fouls guarding McTaggart early in the first half, Jake. And due to those 2 fouls, he sat the whole first half. And then you saw him come out in the 3rd quarter, and he had 7 points in the 3rd quarter. So if he could have, I'm not saying average 7 points a quarter, but if he could have maintained some of that earlier in the game without foul trouble, he could have helped keep Andrews in it because he's kind of one of their guys. Him and Weaver are their 2 consistent scorers. You've seen Keegan Ellis have a big night. We've seen the Martin boys help out scoring-wise. Graham Birch has got the capability to hit some jump shots. But I think if you're Andrews, you're looking for your 2 consistent scorers to be Isaac Weaver, obviously, who can heat up and is getting hot from three lately. And then you got Rattler inside. And that will give them a really good 1-2 outside as they wait for some of their younger players to come along. But I'm really impressed with the young Andrews team. I think they've really grown. You can see that they play really hard for new head coach Matt Manley. And they're pretty well disciplined and they're physical. They're not afraid to set tough screens and go get a rebound. But they're still really young, and I think you're going to see them have up and down nights, and that's just a sign of a young team. But I think as we get further along, we'll see them continue to play better and better throughout the year, and team come conference tournament time that no one will want to face. I've got the correct Hazel Andrews girls one in here now that we can talk over. Hazel's girls did not play their best basketball last night, but they did enough to get it done. And that's one of the things I talked to head coach Chad McClure after the game, and he said, that's the first time his girls, and he's got a lot of young players that have had to play on back-to-back nights. And sometimes, regardless of the opponent, when you play on back-to-back nights, you just got to find a way to grind out a win. And I thought Andrews' girls were pretty decent. They're still struggling with the turnover bug. Honestly, when they don't turn it over, their offense isn't bad, as you can see from some of the highlights. Especially Emily Mueller, she can really score it. But the problem is, can you get her looks? You got to find a way to get her some shots without them turning it over. You just see it there as that's an easy steal for Lila Payne on a pass to Cecilia Jones. But like I said, when Andrews gets the ball into the half court and gets a shot up, they're pretty good shots. Honestly, their shooting percentage in the game, I don't have official stats on it, probably wasn't that bad. It's just the fact that they're not getting enough shots up. Between just the turnovers and lack of offensive rebounds. But the story in this one was very similar. Lila Payne was hot early and then hot late. You see it here. She's going to hit back-to-back corner threes, and she takes a 12-point game to an 18-point game in a matter of 10 or 15 seconds. And that really just sealed the deal for the Lady Yellow Jackets, who are now over 500, 3-2. And we know they've got a big game coming up with Murphy on Friday. We'll hope that one gets played. But moving on, we've talked enough about Hayesville. We'll talk about Andrews a little bit as we are just getting done with them, and we'll continue. Their girls picked up their first win of the year, beating Invest Collegiate last Friday night. Big win for the Andrews girls, because right now, for the Andrews girls program, if we're just being honest, any win's a big win. That's more wins than they had all last season. And I think one of the things when I talked to Chad McClure last night from Hazel, he just said that Andrews girls team is much improved. Years past it was just a rollover. But I think that Andrews girls team, don't be surprised if they find a way to win a conference game or two this year, and hopefully pick up some more wins in the non-conference. But when you're starting from a low point where their program was a couple years ago, it takes time to build back up to be a competitive program. And then looking at the boys' side. The boys also had a big win over Invest Collegiate Imagine last Friday night. We'll take a look at those highlights real quick. Isaac Weaver, incredibly hot in that game. I think he had 28, if I'm correct, and just played really, really well.
Yeah, Weaver was one of our top performers of the week last week. That I'm not sure what the full name of that Invest Collegiate
Imagine.
Yeah, Invest Collegiate Imagine or something like that. But that was a good game for Andrews, a good win for them to get their legs underneath them. Unfortunately for Andrews, I do think their point guard, Donovan Bateman, is injured. I don't know how severe it is. I think they're waiting on an MRI, so we'll see. But I would be surprised, especially with the way things look for them in football next year. I honestly would be surprised if he plays this year.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully it's something minor. You never know. Maybe he comes back after Christmas or something. I mean, we wish him the best regardless. But even without him, I think this Andrews team, we talked about, they're young, Jake, and there's going to be nights where they play great, and there's going to be nights where they don't play great. We've seen it. Keegan Ellis has arrived, and people now know who he is. It's kind of like, they always say that hitter or that pitcher that comes up from AAA into the majors and they play really well in their first 15 at bats or in their first 2 starts, and then people get a scouting report on them, and it's a little bit of a struggle, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying struggle. Ellis is still playing pretty good. He's just, people have realized, don't leave Keegan Ellis open for 3 now that they know who he is. So I think it's one of those things you're going to see. You're going to see them really start to improve as the year goes on. And I said it earlier, I think they're a team you're not going to want to face come conference tournament time once Keegan Ellis is fully up to speed. Isaac Weaver's going. And like I said, I've really been impressed with Cam Rattler as a sophomore. I mentioned, it hurt Andrews last night to have him have to sit out the first half with foul trouble. But I think overall, if you can get Ellis to come along as that third scoring option, he's a pretty dangerous third scoring option. And if you can get a consistent 1-2 punch from Rattler and Weaver where they're getting you 12-plus points, if not more than that a night, Andrews could develop into a pretty dangerous team.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I mean, I think we've said it every show. Andrews is going to beat somebody they shouldn't this year. And going back to our preseason rankings, I mean, just looking at them from now, knowing what we know now, I mean, I think it's still pretty fluid. I mean, Andrews could end up, I think, finishing as high as 3rd or 4th. And, I don't think they are going to break into the top 2. I think after watching Swain and Hayesville, they're the top 2 teams in the conference this year. But it definitely wouldn't shock me to see Andrews rattle off some wins and upset Cherokee and beat Murphy and finish right there in 3rd or 4th.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think I'm really excited as we get into conference play here. We'll start to find some of that stuff out real quick. Hopefully COVID doesn't mess things up too bad, and there's just 1 or 2 game delays. We had that at the beginning of the football season. That's kind of my hope, Jake, where beginning of football season, yeah, there were some delays and stuff, but then we got about a third into the season, and we were smooth sailing from there. So hopefully it's similar because we know some local area teams, Pisgah, and some others have had some trouble with COVID. We don't know why the Murphy-Cherokee game got postponed tonight. Hopefully it's just precautionary. But moving forward, we'll talk about one more teams last week before we hit the break. Let's talk about Franklin. First off, we'll start with their girls team. Beat Swain again on Friday night, beat them twice in a week. Both games were close. We have highlights from that game, courtesy of the Franklin Panther Sports Network. Both games are just close. Just coming down the stretch of each of these games, Jake, the Lady Panthers just had a little bit more scoring touch.
Yeah, and like we talked about last week, the Swain team's just a young team, and games like this are going to happen. I think next year will be a really good year for them because they'll finally be able to get some experience under their belt and kind of reach over the hump. But I think this year is going to be a lot of stuff just like this game where they can't quite figure it out and they lose in some pretty close games.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. But I think on the flip side of it, I know Franklin's not in the Smoky Mountain Conference, but they're a team we cover. I think the Franklin Panther girls team, that's a team that can compete for their conference championship this year and possibly make some type of run in the 3A playoffs. They're playing some really good basketball. They run some really good sets and do a great job of getting their players open. And number 30, Tori Ensley, you see her right there. Dude, she can fill it up. You thought it was an anomaly when she had 30-something at Swain. Well, she just basically, I don't know. I didn't get a point total for last week on their Friday game, but you can just tell by the number of highlights she's involved in that she did plenty of scoring for Franklin against Swain. I'm sure the Swain girls were tired of hearing Ensley's name come over the loudspeaker saying Ensley with another bucket.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. And have they lost the game yet? This Franklin girls team?
Yeah, let's see. They're 4-3 overall. They did lose the Raven Gap last Saturday, but a lot of teams they've lost to, Jake, are pretty dang good teams. And get this, last night they beat East Henderson's girls 68-9. That's a
jeez.
That's rough. And then we'll see. Looking at it, Franklin's boys. We'll get to that game. Franklin's boys last week lost to Raven County Saturday. They beat East Henderson in a conference game last night, 56-48. But let's get to the one I think people have been wanting to see the highlight from. Here's the Franklin Swain boys game, Jake. There was plenty of offense, very little defense in this one. I think the final score was 95-66. Look at from here on the broadcast, I never saw the official stats, but at one point, Jake, I heard the Franklin Panther Sports Network guys, they talked about the score or the percentages, and they said at the end of the second quarter, Franklin's boys were shooting 73% from three.
Jeez.
I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're playing the Lakers on. I mean, if Franklin's boys shoot 73% from three and they can get a bunch of them off, it can be tough to beat.
Yeah, that's crazy. Wasn't the first time these two matched up, wasn't it a completely different story?
Yeah, I mean, they weren't as hot shooting, and Swain outscored them. I mean, it wasn't quite as bad in reverse, but I mean, these two teams have split on the year now. And one thing I want to say is, I'm sure Swain's glad they got Donovan Grunwald back. That kid is a coach's dream, Jake. He's a great defender. He's not a high volume shooter, but he's a high volume scorer, if that makes sense. It's like he's not taking 20 shots to get to 25 points. He's taking like 11 shots to get to, his percentages have to be crazy to start the year. This score could have been worse if it wasn't for Grunwald. As you see, as we get into the third and fourth quarter here, he's the only one hitting shots for him. But I mean, he was hitting threes, step back threes. He hit one from behind the corner of the backboard on a step back three, Jake. He's a guy that he's going to be in our running, depending on who wins conference. For boys, he'll be in the running for Conference Player of the Year for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And we knew that coming in. But this game, a really fun one to watch. Obviously, the score got real out of hand late in the game, but it's on Franklin Panther Sports Network. You can go back and watch it. And I would encourage you to do so because those are two really good boys basketball teams in our area. And Swain, they may have gotten hammered in this one, but they're still a really good basketball team, and I think they're going to compete for top in the conference. I mean, they catch fire, and they want it a little bit more. They're a team that could definitely beat Hayesville coming down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I will mention, now we'll save it for after the break. Got to tease some stuff when it comes to Hayesville Swain because those are going to be some big boys matchups this year. But we'll take a quick break. When we get back, we'll discuss some of our other games that happened last week, and then we'll get into next week's schedule as well as highlighting some of our individual players' accolades at the beginning of the season here. Caleb Tom for Jake West. You're watching the Western North Carolina Shoot-Around. We'll be right back.
It's all happening at your hometown dealer, Jackie Jones Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. Big Finish event featuring this best selection and lowest prices. We've got your next ride for less. All new Grand Cherokee L starts at just $43,870. Ram Bighorn Quad Cab at just $44,855. Many more on sale now. Annual Big Finish event at Jackie Jones Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, where hometown dealer pricing makes all the difference.
Caleb Tallman, Jake West back with you live on the Western North Carolina Shoot-Around as we're still continuing to go around the conference and highlight some of our local area teams. But I'm going to throw it over to Jake. We've got two teams left that we need to take a look at their schedules and see how they did last week, and that's Murphy and Robbinsville. You want to start out with Murphy, Jake?
Yeah, Murphy, when our show was airing last week, they were playing Inca, and they got their girls got a big 52-31 win over a much bigger school in Inca. And then on Friday, they went down to Aussie Dam and beat them 67-29. But on Saturday, they went over to Dahlonega and faced the Lumpkin County Lady Indians and got beat 49-29. The Lady Indians are the number 1 team in all of AAA in Georgia. I mean, they're probably the best girls team I've seen. Maybe ever. I think they're definitely better than the two Murphy State Championship teams that we saw. But nonetheless, I mean, 49-29 is not a good look at any point in time. But Lumpkin County just smothering. And if you want to know more about them, our Georgia show will air right after this one, and we'll tell you a lot more about them. We're going to have their coach on for an interview later in the year. He's done a great job with that program. But like we said, Murphy and Cherokee were supposed to play tonight. I think that would have given us a good gauge, a good measuring stick for how good both girls teams are, and also how good both boys teams are. I mean, the boys, Murphy boys lost to Inca big. They went to Hiwassee Dam, lost that game by 1 point. 52 fouls called in that game. So, yeah, not a fun game to watch, but it ended up being pretty good there at the end. A barn burner. Murphy lost by 1. And the boys did not go to Lumpkin and play. But both teams, I mean, the boys team, much like a lot of other boys teams in the conference, still trying to get their legs out underneath them. I think they've got enough athleticism and enough height for sure to challenge some teams down the stretch. I really wish that Cherokee game was getting played right now.
Yeah, so do I, because we would be doing the Cherokee game, and you'd be live on the broadcast instead of just talking about what could be. As much as we love doing this show, I always like live game broadcast just a little bit better because we get to highlight the kids. Hey, if you want to, real quick, I got a highlight via Max Preps from that Murphy girls, Inca girls matchup. We'll show that one real quick for our last highlight of the week. I mean, I don't know how many times we'll say it this year, Jake, but Ray Gutierrez is not afraid to play anyone. I mean,
this one worked out well for them, and they got a good win. It's really going to help the RPI, and that's not something we've talked about a lot, but the RPI is going to be helped out even by the Lumpkin loss, because Lumpkin, they lost 1 game to Buford, who's probably one of the best girls teams in the nation, but they probably aren't going to lose another game, at least until maybe the Final Four or the state championship in Georgia. So the RPI is really going to be helped out, but you're really seeing a lot of young girls get to play a lot of ball for the Bulldogs here early on. Murphy lost going to be one of their returning seniors and probably starting point guard, and Taylor Phillips. She's not playing this year. But so that means some of the younger girls are going to have to step up and play, and they have, and it's really going to help them out down the stretch when these young girls get some experience under their belt.
Yeah, and I think one of the things they've seen players like you're seeing Amber Martin having a pretty good game here that are capable of being that second scorer. We know Torrin Rogers is their no doubt leader, but can you find a girl that's going to get you 12 a game, 12 to 15 a game in big games, to get you back to where you want to be near the top of the conference, right?
Yeah, I think that the compliment to Torrin Rogers this year is going to be Addie Johnson, just a freshman, but I still think she's going to have to be that girl that's scoring 8 to 12 points a game for them to complement Torrin's 20, because right now I think Torrin's averaging 24 a game.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. Let Torrin keep doing that. She just needs some help along the way, and I think Addie Johnson probably does have a really good opportunity to do it, but you got to have a Batman or a Robin to your Batman. And so I think Amber Martin's possibly capable, and even Torrin Rogers' younger sister, Lachlan. And I mean, it's not just going to be 2 players, too. They just need to find out, okay, can we take Torrin off the floor for a minute in this third quarter to get her a rest, getting ready to go into the fourth quarter, or God forbid she gets in foul trouble? Do you have someone that you can carry the scoring load? Because sometimes, and I know you've watched some of their stuff, Jake, it looks like to me that when Torrin's not on the floor, they get just a little bit lost at times.
Yeah, for sure. And that comes obviously with their lack of experience that they have on this team. I mean, they've got a really young team, which bodes well for the future. But it's a really good thing they have a girl like Torin and Amber on this roster that can kind of guide these girls in the right direction.
Yeah, and then let's look. Last thing we need to looking at last week is Robbinsville. I think you've got some stats from the Robbinsville games. Their girls are 3-0. Their boys are 1-2 overall. But their girls won both their games last week, while the boys lost both their games last week.
Yeah, last week they played Smoky Mountain, and then they played Swain County. But the biggest thing for me for the boys to take away is Xander Wachacha. 2 games last week, he had 22 points against Swain, and he had 20 points against Smoky Mountain. So not a kid we talked about preseason-wise, but a kid that's making a run for Player of the Year for sure. Because he had, against Swain County, 22 points, 5 rebounds, 3 steals, 3 assists, just filling up the stat sheet. And also Camden Jordan is another one that's really helping them. I think Robbinsville's problem right now is they still were in football mode. I think a lot of them thought they should be playing last Saturday in the state championship game. So now that that's over, maybe they can kind of shift gears in their mind and get ready to be fully in on this basketball team or on this basketball season. But as far as girls are concerned, obviously they're rolling. I mean, there's a reason they were the favorite to win the conference and probably one of the best teams in the state. They are led by Desta Trammell. Obviously, she had 18 and 24 last week, 24 against Smoky Mountain, 18 in the first half against Swain, didn't play much in the second half. But also Kinsley Phillips against Swain had 17, and Jacob Jimenez is kind of what we were talking about Murphy needs to find. I think Jimenez is the kind of the Robin to Desta's Batman and really helps them get it done. She's the man down low for Robbinsville, and she gets a lot of boards, and she also gets a lot of second chance points, and that's what you need to be a complete basketball team.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then one guy, just because you mentioned him, and I wanted to let you finish, Xander Wachacha is a kid that I remember watching him on JVs last year, Jake, and he's one of those kids you watch him on JV, and yeah, he was small, but you're like, man, he could probably help their varsity. And so it's like, I know he's not a guy that had varsity time, so we didn't make a lot of predictions about him. But if you've seen that kid play basketball, you know he's pretty special. And I think that as Robbinsville's football players come along, it may hurt that Robbinsville might pick up an early loss or two, and that may hurt their chances to win the conference in boys. But they're a team, come conference tournament time, they could really – I think they have the talent, Jake, that they can hang with anybody and beat anybody on the right night if they're shooting it well.
Yeah, well, that's what we talked about in our pilot show was Robbinsville may drop a few games early because they're still in football mode, and that might keep them from getting up there and trying to win the conference. But they're definitely not a team you want to see come playoff time because by then, all those guys, Brock, Xander, Camden, all of them. Brock's little brother's playing really good. Bryce, he's playing really good. So that's a team that's definitely going to be one to watch.
Yeah. And we're going to mention a couple things here before we take one more break and get to next week's games. But Jake, let's just take a moment. I know you made some graphics that went out on our Twitter and our Facebook pages. We'll share those here as well to highlight some of the best performances from around the conference as the season gets started here. First, Desta Trammell. We talked about what she had, but this is her averages through 2 games: 22 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. And I tell you what, 5 rebounds for Desta Trammell a game, that's impressive because she's not an oversized point guard by any means. And then moving forward, wish we could be seeing her playing tonight against Murphy because that might be a really fun matchup is Layla McMillan versus Torrin Rogers because Layla McMillan, I don't care if you're playing a middle school team, Jake, 41 points is 41 points. So pretty impressive. Mentioned Torrin Rogers. She's averaging 22 points, 9 boards, 2 assists. And I know she's also averaging a bunch of blocks because just from the highlights we've seen, she always blocking shots. Isaac Weaver, we mentioned his 28-point performance he had over in Vest Collegiate. He's going to have to lead the way, I think, as a junior for Andrews this year. But obviously, he's showing the capability, hit some tough shots against Hazel last night. If he gets up to the point where he's averaging high teens, low 20s, Andrews could do some big things. And then saving Colby Ash, averaging 24 points over the last 2 games, not including last night. These graphics were put out. Colby actually had a lower scoring night last night just because they were up so big. But you know him. At any given moment, Jake, you know he can go off for 35 if that's what his team needs. What's one of my favorite things about Ash is he'll pass the ball if he needs to pass the ball to help his team win, or he can fill it up on the score sheet to help his team win.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we'll talk about Ash more when we get back from the break, but he's one of the best high school basketball players I've ever seen, especially in this area. But let's take a quick break, and we'll be back. This is the Western North Carolina Shootaround presented by Team FYN Sports.
It's all happening at your hometown dealer, Jackie Jones Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. Big Finish event featuring this best selection and lowest prices. We've got your next ride for less. All new Grand Cherokee L starts at just $43,870. Ram Bighorn Quad Cab at just $44,855. Many more on sale now. Annual Big Finish event at Jackie Jones Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, where hometown dealer pricing makes all the difference.
Welcome back, folks. Caleb Tallman, Jake West. This is the Western North Carolina Shoot-Around. You've seen us go over all the games, share some highlights, highlight some of our young athletes from around the conference. We'll wrap up this week's show just by going over the games to come. And hopefully, Jake, you know, we say this, knock on wood, right? Hopefully all these games get played. And if not, they're able to be rescheduled and we don't have any major issues. You know, we said the same thing during football. You and I kind of shy away from trying to find out too much COVID information because, one, it's really medical stuff's none of our business, but we just wish everyone the best and hope that games can get played. But let's just take a look and highlight some of the big games around the conference coming up in the next week. Coming towards the tail end of this week, Jake, I think the biggest one to talk about in the Smoky Mountain Conference probably is Hazel plays Murphy, scheduled to play Murphy on Friday. You're a Murphy guy. Just give me your thoughts. Obviously, I think that girls' game, Murphy's going to be favored. But just go ahead and give us your thoughts on the girls' game matchup real quick.
Yeah, the girls' game, I got to watch the Hayesville girls get a good win against Hiawassee Dam, but it wasn't a 67-29 win over Hiawassee Dam like Murphy's girls had. So I think obviously Murphy's girls are going to be favored going into that. But you've always got to watch Hayesville, especially with the two Lilas. They both can get hot from three, and they've also got the other girl, I can't remember her name, that can shoot.
Cecilia Jones, and I think they got and Brianna Cawthorn both shoot it a little bit at times.
Yeah, the Jones girl is pretty good from three too. So anything that can shoot the deep ball, I mean, all it takes is just getting hot, and you can beat anybody. So it should be a good one to watch. But obviously, if Murphy does what they're supposed to do, they should be able to take care of business. But as far as the boys' game, I mean, you could say the same thing for Hayesville when talking about the boys' game. As long as Hayesville handles their business and does what they're supposed to do, they should definitely come away with a win over Murphy. But one of the good things that you're going to see is McTaggart's going to be challenged, probably more so in this one than he has been all year, just height-wise, because Murphy's got three guys that are over 6'3", and Jake's not really. I mean, in the Smoky Mountain Conference, you're not used to seeing that. I mean, the Rumbler kid, I think it's 6'6", so that's close to Jake's height. And Jake doesn't see that a lot. Scogan's 6'4", and then Hunter Laney's 6'2", or 6'3", so that's a lot of height down low. And just like we talked about in the girls' game, all it takes is somebody getting hot to keep it close. And if it's close, you never know what'll happen. I think one of the Hayesville-Murphy games was pretty close last year.
I think the Hayesville at Murphy game was pretty close. And then Colby Ash got hot down the stretch, but it was close for about 3/4. And Colby Ash, who I mentioned, I think that's the difference in the game, though, Jake, is just that I don't think Murphy, one, has a matchup. I don't think their guards match up well with Hayesville's guards whatsoever. And Murphy's going to try to go some double or even triple big lineup where they put Scogan on a wing. And that might bother Hayesville a little bit, but I think if they do put all that size out on the floor, you'll see Hayesville press, and you'll see Hayesville, even a really good Athletic Andrews team last night, they could not keep up with Hayesville's team speed up and down the floor. And so I think if you're Murphy, though, one of the things you probably, even if you have to sacrifice scoring a little bit early, I would work my tail off to get McTaggart in foul trouble. We know Hayesville's still without Kyle Lunsford, and maybe you put yourself in a position where if McTaggart has to sit on the bench with fouls a little bit, you can just outsize Hayesville for a stretch of the game.
Yeah, one thing, 52 fouls in Murphy's game against Hawaii Dam. They obviously do something to get in another team's head and to pester them. So we'll see who keeps their cool and who's able to play this one good down the stretch. But going back to Colby, I don't think Colby Ash gets enough love. That's the best basketball player in Western North Carolina that I've ever seen. He's so smooth, so quick. Everything he does is just perfect. You literally – the two Cottrell kids, Josh and Zach, they were very good, but I think Colby's just a little bit better than them. Colby – I don't know – if Colby's 6'2", I think he's going to play in the ACC, but obviously he's not. But maybe with the way the world's going and the way the transfer portal is working, it wouldn't surprise me to see him going and play in D1 basketball before too long.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love Colby. That's one of those kids that, Jake, every single time I walk into Hayesville's gym, there's Colby Ash shooting. And it's just, he's one of those kids, not to knock him at all, but I don't know if he was necessarily born or gifted with, that 6'5" height and that 40-inch vertical. That's a kid that has just probably, more than any other athlete I've ever seen, just absolutely 100% works his tail off 7 days a week. And he has gotten himself to where he is just through hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of skill work. And so that impresses me even more that, some kids are just gifted with certain abilities and some kids are gifted with some, but just work to get to where they are. And that's definitely an identifier of Colby. And just as we're talking about Hayesville, we'll get into some big games next week, Jake, as we look at the schedule. One game I want to talk about, we'll break it down just a little bit. If we're doing, I know during the football season we did game of the week. I know we're not necessarily saying game of the week because basketball's got too much going on, it's not a weekly game. But if there's a boys game of the week next week, it's got to be Swain at Hayesville next Tuesday night. And I'm pretty pumped about that one, Jake, because I'm going to be live on the call on Tuesday night. It's going to be on fyntv.com. I highly doubt there's going to be a better boys game in Western North Carolina to watch next Tuesday night. And I think it's really we're going to find out how our conference sits.
Yeah, Tuesday night's going to be a really good night for basketball. Obviously we'll recap that game on next week's show, but Murphy is going to play host to Robbinsville next Tuesday night also. So that girls game and that boys game in Murphy will be really good. So Tuesday night, there'll be no shortage of basketball if you're a high school basketball fan in Western North Carolina.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see. We'll talk about that boys game just a little bit before we talk about the girls game. Is Swain wants to play, I'm going to outscore you. Hayesville, I think, has the capability to score in the 80s or 90s if that's what they're trying to do. But Hayesville's got the best team defense I've seen this year. So I think that's just a really interesting contrast is I just don't see Swain putting up a 70 or 80 spot on Hayesville's defense. And so I think that's going to be a really good game. I talked about this right before we went to a break earlier, and I said I'd bring it up later. I was talking with one of Hayesville's coaches. What's really interesting, Jake, is it's actually possible that Hayesville and Swain could play 5 times this year. They've got the 2 regular season conference matchups. They're playing in the same Christmas tournament at Swain. So if they meet up in the Christmas tournament, then you got the conference tournament, and then you got the playoffs. And even one of Hayesville's coaches said, I don't know that we would beat Swain 5 times. I'm not saying we'll beat them any times, but, I just think the way the schedule's laid out, it could be really interesting how that works out with as many times as they could potentially play each other. And I tell you what, no matter how many, if they just play 2 times or they play 5 times or anywhere in between, that's going to be a battle every single time.
Yeah, I think Swain's good. I think they're really underrated. And that'll give us a chance to really see what Hayesville's made of. If they come in there and they stifle Swain and that game's a big 10-point victory for them, then I think it's clear and obvious that they're going to be sitting at the top of the conference without any challengers. But, I think Hayesville has got to make sure they don't let anybody hang around this year because they're going to get everybody's best shot. And I think Swain may feel a little bit disrespected. I mean, they've got a really good team, some really good returners coming back. So, I don't know. I think, Hayesville's defense is good, but if the same Swain team that showed up against Franklin in the first game of the season, Hayesville could be in trouble.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. I think it's just going to be a really good ball game. But let's talk about, before we wrap up the show, let's talk about that Robbinsville-Murphy girls matchup. My initial thoughts, and I'll let you talk about it more because you cover both those teams more than I do, is I'm not really sure who Robbinsville has that's going to guard Torrin, but I'm not really sure who Murphy has that's going to guard Trammell. I think so. Coaching could come big time in this one to see who you match up with who. Do you go zone? Does Torrin have a big night like she did in the playoffs last year where they couldn't stop her inside? Or do we see them just control it and say, even if Torrin gets hers, we're going to make sure everyone else is stifled and you're not going to beat us with one player?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely going to come down to coaching. It's also going to come down to who wants it more, but which it always does. But one thing that kind of concerns me is if Murphy does have some girls that are sick, and that's the reason why they had to cancel tonight's game, that's only a week away, and sometimes it takes a while to get rid of some of this stuff, whether it be the flu or COVID or whatever is going around. So that could be big is who's actually going to be out playing. But I think both coaches are really good. But I think no matter what is put out there, they're each going to have a game plan to put their best players in a position to win. It just comes down to who's going to hit the big shots. And I think we could see I think Addie Johnson's probably going to be the Bulldogs' answer for Desta Trammell. I'm not saying she's going to shut her down. I just think that's who they're going to put on her to answer your question of who's going to be matched up with them. I think it's either going to be her or maybe Lachlan Rogers, Torrin's little sister. But it'll probably be just a revolving door of whoever can keep up with Desta Trammell. She's so fast and she's got such a high motor. I don't know if Murphy has anybody that could play on her the whole game. But like you said, on the flip side, Robbinsville doesn't have anybody that can play on Torrin the whole game. If Torrin's down there and she gets Jaka in foul trouble, that's going to play big for Murphy. But the same with Robbinsville. If Jaka is able to get Torrin in foul trouble, I don't think that Murphy has anybody else that's going to be able to score because I think Desta's going to be on Addie, and that's Murphy's second leading scorer. So a lot of good storylines going into this one, and it's going to be good. But another couple good games next week. Andrews has some good games. Andrews plays Swain this week on Friday, and I think they have Cherokee on Tuesday at home. So that'll be a good one. Tuesday's good basketball in the Smoky Mountain Conference.
Yeah, it's one of those days. It's like it's cool to have all those games on the same day, but on the same hand, it's like, man, you wish you could make it to 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, exactly. I honestly was thinking, like, how can I watch all of these games at the same time? But it's gonna be awesome to see.
It's one of those games where it's like, yeah, you might be an Andrews fan and you're at your game on Tuesday night, but between quarters you can hop on the FYN TV app and at least check out how it's going in Hayesville and you're texting your buddy from Murphy trying to find out what the Murphy Robbinsville girls score is, that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff you and I love to do. But you got anything else as we wrap up here, Jake?
No, it's going to be – this feels like the best week, obviously the best week so far, maybe the best week we're going to have in conference basketball. So It'll be fun. So keep up with us. Follow us on Twitter. Keep up with us on Facebook. We'll try to have as many school updates and stuff as possible.
Yeah, and as we wrap up the show here, guys, we got about 10 minutes left. We've got a full interview with Coach Odom, Todd Odom, Robbinsville's head wrestling coach. You can go check that out on our Facebook, our Twitter, or our YouTube. But we're going to air a clip of it here to wrap up our show today. But if you want to see the full 30-ish minute version, go check out the Team FY Sports YouTube. But Caleb Tallman for Jake West, you've been watching the Western North Carolina Shootaround.
It's otherworldly. Tell us about just the atmosphere when you guys do host a match for some of the people that may have never been.
Well, and I'll tell you the story that's behind that whole show, if you will. Coach Billy Knight has been an assistant and helped coach the middle school for a long time, but me and him are like brothers, and we've coached together virtually the last 18 years together. And, I called him one night at about 10 o'clock at night. I was running about 75 mile an hour, and Wanted Dead or Alive came on. And, when you're on the road, you're thinking, all these things start coming in your head. And we knew in order to grow our program and to be able to market the sport, that we kind of had to make it a spectacle. We had to make it a show. And we're hard to beat at Robbinsville. When we're in our home gym, it's tough on people. And so we started talking about what would be the coolest thing that you could ever see at a wrestling match. And obviously we'd seen, mat lights and those kind of things, but the production of it now, we've pretty much got down to a science. But there's gongs from Hell's Bells going off, and a little bit of Red Riders, Lunatic Fringe, and then the lightning strikes are from 38 Specials Chain Lightning, and we figured out now that it goes completely dark for a few seconds, and then all of a sudden that light starts flickering, and Wanted Dead or Alive by Bon Jovi comes on, then it's on. I mean, at that point, we've got our guys wound up, and we just turn them loose. So it, and we've made it to where I think what's important is that we only let our varsity kids do that.
Yeah.
And we've got a tremendous, middle school program, and we've got a tremendous kids program, but to wrestle under that light is a privilege reserved only for those varsity guys. And that makes them want to get to that. And once we kind of get them on the high school team at this point, they rarely leave us, because it's pretty addictive to wrestle in front of a crowd there at Robbinsville.
Well, I think I'm sure you know this, but I think it's the same way for wrestlers at other schools. I mean, I remember being a middle schooler at Murphy and wrestling and going to watch the high school matches and being like, man, I can't wait until I get into high school and we come over here to Robbinsville just to get to wrestle in this kind of atmosphere. I mean, it's intimidating, but it's also like, man, this is what it's really about. This is the only place in the area where you can get this kind of support and atmosphere when you hit the mat. I mean, it's really something to see. If I want to encourage all of our viewers, if you haven't been to a Robbinsville wrestling match, you need to go. And I'm sure, Coach, you can send me your schedule, and I'm sure you got some big matches coming up. We'll post that on our page and try to encourage everybody to come out and watch. But another thing I wanted to ask you is, how do you deal with I mean, in our area, we got small 1A schools. Robbinsville is one of the smallest 1A schools. You've got football going up all the way in halfway through your season. You got a bunch of multi-sport athletes. Is that something you encourage your kids to get out there and do as much stuff as they can?
Absolutely. At the 1A level, you just have to share athletes. It is what it is. And I played football when I was in school and wrestled and believe it or not, ran track before I had my leg amputated. But, it's one of those things where for me, we've always promoted those other sports and encouraged those other sports. And you hear people, well, what if they get hurt? Well, okay, what if they do? Then you're going to figure it out as a coach, because at the end of the day, for me, I've probably had at least a dozen kids get hurt in football that couldn't wrestle for me. But in my humble opinion, I feel like that God has a plan for everybody. And if it's your destiny to get hurt, it's your destiny to get hurt. So I've just got to figure a way through it and around it. But there's too many kids that went through their entire careers not injured and not hurt, and they've had a great time. And so we encourage that. And, basically our whole staff, we go and we've got coaches that coach football and wrestling. And so, we go to the games and we support our kids in their other sports, and we encourage that. And I think anybody that doesn't encourage a kid, especially at our level, to play everything they can to be able to have the best high school experience they could possibly have is a fool. And that's just the way it is. If people don't encourage kids to play other sports, then, for me, I have a huge problem with that, because I always encourage kids to play other sports and do other things, because at the end of the day, it's a very small window of time that you get to be a kid, and you need to enjoy every bit of it that you can.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, they've only got 4 years to get out there and play everything they can. I think
That's
it's awesome. I think it's awesome that you guys support that. But let's talk about some of those athletes individually. I mean, you got back some of your football players on the mat. You got Cage Williams and Ben Wachacha and some of those guys. Tell us about them. I mean, I know Cage Williams, we'll talk about him first. That's the name that always gets talked about in Western North Carolina wrestling. Tell us about him. And I mean, we know he's a beast on the mat, but and I've talked to him and done interviews with him. I know he's a kid with really great character. I mean, speak to him and what he means to your program, and then go through the list of the guys that you want to highlight, and Miss Fink too.
I got you. So, and I got asked about Cage this morning. Cage has been a high level wrestler for a long time. And he's one of those kids that we couldn't wait for him to finally grow up, to finally, get to our program. And somebody asked me this morning, was like, well, he's such high level, is he hard to coach? And my response was no, he's actually not hard to coach. He's very receptive. He's a great teammate. He gives max effort every time he comes in the room. So I, as far as Cage, and God, he's a hammer. I mean, I ain't gonna lie about that either. I mean, you better have him strapped on tight when you wrestle that cat, So for me, he is a pleasure to have in the room. He is super talented, and he's one of those guys that's done something that's never been done at our school, and that's win a state title as a freshman. So he's got obviously a bright future ahead of him. I know his aspirations are to wrestle at the next level, and obviously we'll do everything to get him there. And yeah, he's hard to deal with in his group. He's one of the best guys in the room, obviously, and in a room full of a lot of talented people right now. So
yeah,
so he does real well. So I'm tickled to death to have him, and I'm tickled to death that he's a big part of the Ville. And he has an energy about him, I guess is the best way to put it, is he doesn't have many bad days. He's always smiling. He's always kind of cackling. I won't call it laughing. He's kind of cackling all the time, and he's ready to roll. So he's a lot of fun to have around.
Well, you mentioned all the talent that you have in that room. I mean, would you have 5 state champions last year?
Yeah. So if you include Ainsley, which I would throw her in there, she won the girls' side of it last year, and then was a state qualifier on the boys' side. So I guess technically we had 6.
Yeah.
I had some coach tell me that was a state record. I thought that was pretty cool to have 5 state champs on the boys' side in one season. So yeah, and out of those 5 boys, and then obviously with Ainsley, I had 6 total, but I've got 5 that returned this year.